Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, key senators offered their perspectives on the best way to use the state surplus for tax relief. The Senate's education bill is ready for a floor vote, and Senate leaders prepare for the governor's State of the State address. Stay tuned for this and more on this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Minnesota has a budget surplus of over $9 billion, and the Senate Republican majority has advanced a tax bill that would use much of the surplus to provide tax relief. The bill passed the Senate in early April on a vote of 42 to 24. Tax Committee Chair Carla Nelson joins me to talk about key aspects of the proposal. Welcome.
Good morning. Good to see you.
There are two big components of the bill, the first of which is reducing the first-tier income tax rate from 5.35% to 2.8%. What will be the impact of cutting this first-tier rate nearly in half, and why this approach?
Cutting the first-tier income tax rate will bring tax relief to every Minnesotan that pays income taxes. And specifically, it will target that relief. The greatest percentage tax cut goes to those who make the least amount. The very smallest, a 1% effective tax cut, would go to those who are at our highest income tax levels. So it's a progressive tax cut, just like our tax system is very progressive. Those who earn the most pay at the highest rate. So it will cut everyone's income taxes, which is really important at a time of skyrocketing inflation. And also it's important to know that Minnesota is a high tax state. No matter how you look at it, we're a bit of a high tax island. And this gets us a little bit closer, a little bit not so far out of the mainstream in our taxation.
The second major component is the complete elimination of taxes on all Social Security benefits. As of now, people above a certain income threshold do pay taxes on those benefits. This change would remove all of those taxes on Social Security benefits. Why should those benefits be completely exempt from taxation?
Well, those benefits were purchased already when Minnesota workers' paychecks were taxed month after month, year after year, decade after decade. Minnesotans bought those benefits. And for then Minnesota to turn around and say, and now we're going to tax you on those benefits that you already purchased, is just wrong. We should be joining the over 30 other states that do not tax Social Security benefits. And that also includes, we will not, under our proposal, we will not be taxing those Social Security disability income payments either. So it is time that we join the majority of other states and not tax those benefits. It's double taxation.
You referenced inflation just a moment ago. Inflation, I think most Minnesotans are starting to feel the sting of it right now, but inflation is also going to impact the cost of state government. So with these permanent income tax cuts and the removal of taxes on Social Security, will the state have enough revenue in future years to meet its obligations?
Well, I think that is a very good question. And the thing to know is we have over a $10 billion surplus. We have a structural balance. We also have $2.5 billion in our reserve account. So the reserve account is there if there is a shortfall, and that is full, that is topped off. So we have taken that rainy day fund and we have topped that off. Now these are additional tax collections that have come in over and above our budget. And I would note too that we are not in a budget year. We're just not even halfway through our budget, and yet we have a $10 billion surplus. So at a time of massive inflation, it is the time to specifically return this to Minnesotans. I think they know best how to spend that or how to have those dollars to help with their bills, not necessarily send it to the Minnesota state government, where, as you know, our budget has been increasing greatly over the years. We're at about $54 billion now. We're increasing at about $2 billion clip a year. So it is definitely time to return this money to the Minnesota taxpayers who have overpaid. It'd be kind of like if you got home and looked at your receipt, you'd been at your favorite store and you saw, well, you were overcharged. And you went back to the store and you said, you know what, I was overcharged for these items. I paid more than what they cost. And the store said, yes, we know that, but you're not getting the money back because we know how to spend it better and we've given it to someone else. So I think it's time to return the money to the taxpayers.
Now, the Senate plan is just one plan. The governor has proposed rebate checks or refunds, one-time refunds of $500 for individuals, $1,000 for couples. The DFL-led House is proposing targeted tax cuts and credits that their House tax chair says will be focused on helping those who need it most. So within these three ideas, is there a compromise to be found?
Well, I think so. I think there's always work towards doing what is right. I would say in this case, certainly Minnesotans can do the math and they understand the difference between a one-time relief and permanent ongoing tax relief month after month, year after year. And also, I think you also have to look at the whole context, which is we are this very high tax state. So I think there is room, but the Minnesota Senate is really focused on supporting Minnesotans, giving them the refund that they paid in, knowing that they know best how to spend that. So, and the other thing is, it's not a budget year. So all of the spending, and the reason the governor is doing, $8 billion of new spending and then these one-time checks, this is not the time to increase spending by $8 billion. Now, next budget cycle, we might look at that, but this is not the time to do that.
The Senate, let's go here. You are currently the tax chair, but before you were the tax chair, you were the education chair. Mm-hmm. And one of the criticisms of this Senate tax plan is that the bulk of the surplus is going to tax cuts and not nearly enough is going to education. Considering the size of the surplus and the challenges that are facing schools, should more money be directed towards education?
Well, I think that is a very good question, and it's a timely question. And let's just go back to the fact that this is not a budget year. So when we come in next session and we have a budget year, that will be the time where we'll be looking at education funding and the entire state budget. But let's talk about education funding momentarily. Certainly, we have had record increases in funding, both under the current Chair Chamberlain, and under my chairmanship as well. We had record funding increases in education. And I do want to note too that we had over $2 billion of funding for education come into Minnesota just for COVID relief. But the real challenge is we have had a declining birth rate for over a decade. And we pay based upon the number of students. The money follows the student. And we have fewer students, and we have continually had fewer students. That is the real issue. And then, of course, with COVID, many parents realize that, well, maybe there's other options for education, or maybe we can use some online options. So parents are also choosing where they think their child can get the best education, and they're making those choices. But the big picture is a declining birth rate. We have fewer students.
This bill is the big picture, but it is not the complete picture. You told reporters recently that the tax committee will now be working on an additional tax bill that will deal with property tax and some other issues. So what more is coming?
Sure. Those things that were not in the first tax bill, those things would be property taxes, local option sales taxes, TIF, aids and credits, those type of things. So those are coming, and we are working on those right now.
And ideas for when the complete tax bill will be all finished and ready to be looked at?
Well, we hope it's soon. We do know this, the last day of session is May 23rd, and so we need to get our second bill off the floor and into conference committee. But as you know, tax bills have to originate in the House, and they haven't passed any tax bills yet. So they will get their tax bill on the floor, they will pass it, we'll get our tax bill, our second tax bill on the floor, we'll pass it, we'll come to conference committee, and we'll see where we can marry those up.
Senator Carla Nelson, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Senate Finance Committee advanced the Omnibus education bill, which would provide $30 million to improve reading proficiency among elementary students.
This year we're focusing on a core foundational problem in our educational system, and that's literacy. This omnibus bill has 5 parts to it, 5 different pieces of legislation, all addressing literacy.
The governor, lieutenant governor, I, and many others have repeatedly said that in no uncertain terms that with this enormous surplus and remaining funding from the federal relief funds, we have an unprecedented and unmissable opportunity to change the trajectory for our students for the better. Our children and our educators need us to rise up to the challenge and meet this moment that's in front of us. And this bill fails the moment of meeting every aspect. It meets components of literacy. It fails to meet some of the other areas.
Let's do the thing that's the biggest bang for the buck, that most fundamentally changes the life of that child. They can't learn history if they can't read. They can't learn science if they can't read. How are they going to fill out a job application if they can't read? So I think everybody at this table should be thrilled that Roger Chamberlain has taken this very intentional, scientifically based, purposeful, effective approach and quit arguing about a bunch of other things and say, for once, we are going to agree that the priority of children learning to read is going to be the thing that we champion in this legislative session.
The priority seems to be certain tax cuts rather than education. And again, here there are $30 million in the bill. I think we've had just funding the special education cost subsidies would have been multiple times that, but that's what the schools need. They need the literacy and funding to do everything.
Members, I'd be happy to support all the money you want for early ed, for anything, for all those programs, if it showed that our kids were reading. But instead what happens is school districts and the department decide to lower the standards and number of credits you need for graduation. Instead of focusing and increasing expectations, they say, we're not going to focus on reading as much to grade our schools. That's what they do. So maybe if we put aside all this other stuff and do what we all say we really want to do and address those children and help those educators, we wouldn't be where we're at today.
The state's $9.25 billion budget surplus has prompted differing approaches to tax policy from the Senate, the House, and Governor Walz. Senator Ann Rest is the ranking DFL member of the Senate Tax Committee, and she joins me to offer her point of view. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with the Senate plan, which passed earlier this month on a vote of 42 to 24. The first pillar of this plan lowers the first-tier income tax rate from 5.35% to 2.8%, thereby lowering the tax obligation for all filers. With a budget surplus, does it make sense to make an adjustment like this that would benefit all taxpayers?
I think one of the major flaws in that approach is that it is an ongoing tax reduction. It's $2 billion every single year. It's not a one-time thing that recognizes the challenges of the pandemic, that represents the challenges of the war in Ukraine, with now an 8% inflation that we are seeing being reported. Mortgage rates are now up at 5%. To give a massive permanent tax cut to everyone, including the very, very wealthy. When the Republican plan came out, they said, this is for everyone. Well, you know what? The very rich don't need this tax cut. Middle income, lower income folks, they need money right now, which is what the governor has proposed. And we need to look at what things are worrying Minnesota families. Certainly high prices for heating, and the high price of taking care of their children while they go to work. And DFL plans have come up with increases in child care credits and in looking at property tax implications and also parents paying for programs, extra programs for their kids to get the education credit for. Those are the permanent ones that we should be looking at, and not a permanent tax cut, which we've seen in the past has resulted in the next several years, an increase in property taxes for homeowners in particular and renters.
Well, I think this leads in then, because on the Senate floor, you offered an amendment that would include Governor Walz's plan, which rather than an ongoing tax cut is just one-time rebate checks of $500 for individuals and $1,000 for couples. You're basically outlining why you think just one-time money is better than ongoing money, but can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. You know, people have dismissed what $500 means to a single person, or what $1,000 means to a couple with a couple of kids. Well, you know, it means a whole month worth of groceries at a time when the prices of groceries are skyrocketing. They are skyrocketing. They need the help now, not this little bit by little bit by little bit that is being promised for the next 5 years. They need it now. And so the $2 billion in the one-time rebates, or direct payments, I call them, to get away from nicknames for things, is what I think Minnesotan families want, they need, and we're seeing some polling that is indicating that people would be just fine getting these $500 or $1,000 checks within the next several months, rather than decreases in their withholding, for example, from their paychecks.
I'd like to talk about the second pillar of the Senate tax proposal, because it would remove all taxes on Social Security income. And that's something that people have been talking about for quite a few years now. In light of the surplus, is it time for Minnesota to become a little bit friendlier to retirees?
Well, there are all kinds of retirees, of course, and many of them do receive Social Security. In Minnesota, most Social Security recipients don't pay any tax on their benefits. No one pays tax on 15% of their Social Security payments, which is what the federal government allows. But in recent years, we have started to, in a sense, inflation adjust what we are allowing to be subtracted from the taxable part of your of Social Security payments. And we believe that we should continue on that track. And it's the same thing with the permanent income tax cut. There are many Social Security recipients whose income well exceeds $100,000. They're not the ones that are bothered by an 8% increase in inflation when they only got 5.9% increase, a hefty increase in their benefits for this year. We need to be looking more at those middle income, fixed income Social Security recipients, not those that have income from any other number of places that support a very comfortable lifestyle. So our plan does allow that gradual increase in the subtraction, but not the permanent wiping out of all taxes on Social Security benefits at this time. Will we get there at some point? I think so.
Well, and so in several of your answers, you've alluded to what the House is proposing. So I would like to just touch on the House tax bill briefly, which in terms of costing, it costs $5 billion less than the Senate's in terms of the next 3 years' budget implications. It is a targeted approach, as you have been talking about. Some of those targets include income tax rebates for families with children, increasing the child and dependent care tax credit, and then a modified Social Security subtraction. So these more targeted approaches, what is the benefit?
Well, I believe that we're going to see stark contrasts that I hope are going to bring us together in meaningful compromises. And And it's also going to reveal what the priorities of the two major parties are. And we're going to see an education bill that only spends $33 million. $33 million. But we're going to see hundreds of millions of dollars in tax cuts for the very wealthy from the Republicans. And to me, those are upside down. And we should recognize the investment that, particularly during the effects of the pandemic, that we need to bring to Minnesota families. And it is not a bad thing to leave some money on the bottom line if we go into a major recession, if we get more involved in the war in Ukraine, and if inflation goes above 8%. It has in the past. So we should learn from the past and not condemn ourselves to repeat it.
So in a sense, this tax policy debate in a time of surplus is really an example of looking at the philosophy of the two parties and then the priorities of the people of Minnesota. We have a significant chunk of change. How do we want to spend it? Is that true?
I think that's very accurate. I think both parties want good things for Minnesotans, but we have vastly different ways of asserting those priorities for Minnesotans and the values that we bring to them to get a good result. And I'm confident, actually, that we will get there.
Senator Ann Rest, I want to thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Governor Tim Walz will present the State of the State address to a joint session of the legislature Sunday evening. This week, I asked a couple key lawmakers a few questions about the upcoming event.
Well, I think we're still a very strong state, but we have a lot of work to get done yet before the end of this legislative session, most particularly dealing with the billion dollar surplus. I think that the Senate Republicans have been very clear. We want permanent structural tax reductions across the board on all the tax brackets because we have to stop with the surpluses. Ideally, we need to have a balanced budget and a balanced amount left as far as surpluses go, not have wildly huge budget surpluses. And I think the Republicans here in the Senate have the best way to do it.
Well, I certainly appreciate the State of the State every time the governor comes in, and I've worked under two different governors, Governor Dayton and Governor Walz, when they bring their hopes and visions for the state. So it's a very meaningful time. It's actually super exciting to hear from the state leader in a more personal level because he's talking to us as legislators. So it's an exciting moment, and I'm looking forward to this year.
First off, I hope that the governor helps us convince the House DFL that the unemployment insurance fund has to be dealt with. We passed that here on the Senate floor in February. This is impacting businesses across the entire state of Minnesota. It's not time for us to pick big businesses versus little businesses. It's time for us to refill and replenish the unemployment account. The second one is, I really hope that the governor abandons his Walzy checks. These single item checks that would go out to people are really distasteful. From the people in my district are very distasteful because what's happening is we're in an election cycle, and these are nothing short of what people think is a bribe because they think Walz is sending them money. The reality of the situation is we need to make structural reductions in income taxes, and the Senate position is the way to go.
Certainly want to hear from the governor his plans for the vision for the future. As a state leader, I know personally all that he's done to keep us safe from this last 2 years of the pandemic and beyond because we're still tracking it. And I want to hear from him what he thinks we need to do to unify our state despite this really divisive time in our political environment. Not to say that we are not stronger than that. We are a strong state, and I want to see him rally our team in the legislature to finish these next 5 weeks of the legislative session to do good for Minnesotans.
I'm going to be sitting behind the governor next to the Speaker of the House. It's going to have a very special meaning to me. All of them are very special opportunities as legislators because it's those times where we get together, it's nonpartisan, we listen to the governor and we talk about how great the state is. And we have a great state here in Minnesota. So it will be very significant because of my retirement, but also because I'm president, and it'll have a very special part of my life in my heart.
I certainly get a little bit of a preferential treatment. I get 3 invitees to the State of the State as a leader, and I chose to bring my former chief of police for Bloomington, Jeffrey Potts, who's now the chief of the Sheriff's Association, and I'm bringing a constituent who literally is a hero, saving the life of an individual on a drive-through of McDonald's, and then a constituent of mine as well that has been behind the scenes supporting me every step of the way. So it's meaningful for me to be able to share that moment with meaningful people in my career here in the Minnesota Senate.
We leave you this week with some of the latest photos by our Senate photographers, AJ Olmscheid and Catherine J. Davis. Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.